So now we're going to get started. So I'm going to say, first again, welcome again. Thank you for attending our event. My name is Vertice Emil Brown, and our event is Making a Splash, the art of building relationships through publicity and marketing. So to get started, this is going to be an interactive event with survey questions that are presented at the top of each segment. And I just need to make some acknowledgments before we begin. I want to thank my fellow CWW members for really wanting us to put this panel on. I want to thank the leaders, Lauren Hynek, Nikki Hawthorne, the chairs, and the vice chair, Frankie Butler. And also a really special thanks to the Inclusion and Equity Department, headed by Terry Lopez, MC Foley, Libby Anderson-Bagley, and Andrew Aroche. And hopefully, Andrew, I got that name correct. And another special thanks to Doug McIsaac, who is our IT guy who's keeping everything Zoom. And, it takes a team to build this together. So I want to thank my co-hosts as well, Sharon Soibel and Deborah Meza. And also, when I first pitched this, I pitched this to one of the CWW subcommittees called the Think Tank. So I want to thank all of the members of the Think Tank. And I really want to thank wonderful and talented and gracious publicists who are giving us their time and knowledge this evening. So before we begin, this panel is broken down into 3 segments. And so I'm going to try and keep the names in alphabetical order, but on the screen right now, you see all of our wonderful publicists. So our first segment, our panelists will include Annie Jeeves and Dustin Smith, and it will be moderated by screenwriter Sharon Soibel. And the topic will be, how to hire a publicist. We'll be talking about social media and marketing. And then in our second segment, our panelists include BB Lerner and Mark Pogaszewski, and it will be moderated by screenwriter Deborah Meza. And we will be talking about specifically publicists for writers and the in-between stage, pre-production, production, and post-production. And finally, we're going to top it off with a segment I like to call award season or film festival season. And this event will be held by the panelists will be 2 veteran awards publicists, Jane Labonte and Tony Thompson. And this is specifically for all of our writers who are hyphenates, who are writer-directors, showrunners, producers, even, hyphen actors who are going through award season. So each segment will be 30 minutes. And at the end of each panel, at the end of all of the panels, the segments, I should say, I will join you and all of the publicists will join you for a wonderful Q&A. So just please keep in mind as you're listening to everything that everyone is at different parts in their career. So hopefully this information will be of use to you. For specific bios and credits, please visit our program, which should be in the chat. And without further ado, Sharon is going to start us off. So thank you all, and I will see you soon.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again so much for joining us this evening. I'm Sharon Soibel, and I'd like to introduce my panelists, Annie Jeeves from Cinematic Red PR, a film and entertainment publicist, and Dustin Smith from Smith House, which is a strategic communications company. And I've asked them each to give a little insight into who they are and how they became publicists and what their background is. So I'll start with Annie.
Hi, yes. So I've been in publicity for about 23 years now, kind of stumbled into it, answered an ad in the back of the Hollywood Reporter, randomly enough. I started in more of a corporate environment before I moved into a world of film and TV, film being my specialty, but I work on a lot of TV and events as well. And Cinematic Red is my own company. So I came from PMK and then Howard Bragman's company, 15 Minutes, where I ran their indie film division and started Cinematic Red 9 years ago. And my goal has always been to be an advocate for creators.
That's lovely. Well, we thank you. Dustin?
Yeah, so I'm Dustin. Smith House is about 3 years old. Before that, I spent about 20 years on the corporate side of entertainment publicity, working in PBS, TLC, CBS, before kind of going out and starting Smith House. We really focus on the television side, but also do work in film, events, and awards, and really focused on storytelling, helping our clients amplify their voices and get their creative content out there, working across a lot of corporate series publicity and work with Casting Society of America. So have a pretty solid hand on in front of the camera and behind the scenes.
I love it. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to start our little segment. I have a survey question. I'd love to find out how many of the audience have used a PR person to get sort of a read on the room. The survey question should be up. And so if everyone would just say yes or no, we'll get a number in just a minute, and then we can get an idea of where everyone sits. And because we got quite a lot, as you know, of people who were interested in coming to the panel tonight, which indicates to me that there's a lot of people who want to know how best to utilize their publicist and a little bit about you guys. So that's that. Yeah, so as you see, 77% of the people have not had. Okay. Well, this will be great for everybody then. So I'll start by saying, when do you hire a PR person?
I mean, for me, go ahead, Annie, please.
Oh, you go ahead.
I think that hiring a PR person you really need to have a story to tell. I mean, part of the power of publicity is really helping extend your story with media in an organic way. And I think the best way to do that is to tie it to something timely and topical. And so I think when you're getting ready to launch a project or something's about to premiere, you're going into a festival cycle, a moment when there is something tangible to talk about is probably one of the best times to do it. Bringing on PR slightly before that to start developing a strategy, getting your story on paper, starting to shape those pitches, letting us start talking to the media on your behalf is a great time. And then really amplifying that campaign when you have something to promote to, typically has worked best in my experience.
And Annie?
Yeah, I would say the same. It also, just be mindful. A lot of times people will reach out to me and there's nowhere where that project is going. And they'll be like, I want to get press on this TV pilot or this film. And it's like, okay, but where can audiences see it? Because the first thing that press are going to say is, where can it be seen? Who, what, they need to have an audience for them to do an interview, to talk about it. In regards to release campaigns, award campaigns, as much leeway time as possible. If you come to me 3 weeks before a release, I'm going to refer you out because I can't help you. It's unrealistic expectations, and you want to plan ahead. Yeah. You want to have, especially in the indie world, you want to have a publicity budget, you want to have a marketing budget, because a lot of your distributors, especially in the really indie spaces, don't. And they're going to put that on the filmmakers, showrunners, creators. That's going to end up on you. So I would just be mindful of that. And there's a lot that can be done if you have, the names and the budget, and it's something that's timely that will resonate. You can even do an announcement story during production. So unit publicity, we can also do a lot and work with you on budget, but we need to have real conversations. It's a bit like extreme dating.
Gotcha. So let me ask you a question. So what is the difference between, for a writer in particular, what's the difference between marketing and PR?
Market, I think the very clear distinction, and they're often grouped together and they work very collaboratively, but marketing is paid. Like you design an ad or you create a trailer and you pay to place that somewhere and you have complete control start to finish, in its kind of your entire brand identity, and you decide where it's going to land, etc. PR is what we call earned media, and we are working very closely with media. We have relationships with the press to help tell your story. So marketing, the end consumer is the audience. Our consumer is media who then tell your story to an audience. So we help navigate that in between, for features and reviews and interviews, helping set the stage to tell your story in a more organic way. I think that the flip side of that people don't tend to understand with PR is that ultimately the journalist has the final say in what that product, what that story looks like. And I think a lot of times people want to hold the PR people accountable for it not always being absolutely perfect. So I think it is important to understand that the PR process is very much a journey. It's not like marketing where you design a poster and then that goes up on a wall somewhere and you know exactly what you're going to get. PR is much more of a conversation and a dance between us as the PR people, you as the client, and the media and the outlet to make sure that we're shaping something that really benefits everybody.
It's also a good, Dustin made a really valid point. It's editorial privilege. If you're paying for something in a magazine or an outlet, it is paid media. So you have complete control. With a review, with an interview, if you've got something that's a little, a challenging topic that it navigating, we're working as closely to massage that with press, but we can't tell them what to do. We can't tell them what to write. And a lot of times we will be the ones who will be punished because it's someone's art. They're very, they're very close to it. And not understanding the fact that editorial is just that. It is editorial privilege. This is not a control-based space. We can guide it best.
But so I'm just trying to think of like some of the writers that I think are on this, don't have a movie coming out, you know what I mean? But, and they do like rewrites on huge features and they're writer number 3. But we're just having that conversation now through the Writers Guild, which is to be able to talk about that on the movie. But in the meantime, I kind of feel like there's this ability that you kind of need to be out there as a writer. And how, like, first of all, I guess, how would somebody hire you? Like if you, as a writer, how do we know when we're looking for you that you're the one? And then 2, how does somebody hire you? And Annie, you can start with this if you would.
So it goes back to my comment about extreme dating. Like you'll typically refer someone who might be a fit, have a conversation. If you're looking to hire a personal publicist, but say you are a third writer on a big upcoming studio movie, it's us then having a conversation with the studio publicist to say, okay, how much leeway is there? When is press starting? To make sure that the press we're talking to on your behalf get screenings, that they're able to see the movie and what we're able to say or how we're able to massage that. Because you're right, if there's multiple writers on it, it's a fine line, and we really are having to stay within the company line of the studio and the film, and that is a much larger team that we're working within. So it's making sure that there aren't any missteps. I had screenwriters even back during my PMK days, and there were a few that didn't tell us some of the missteps, and they didn't tell us a misstep where they literally took something to arbitration but wanted to do press and junket for the premiere. And I had a surprising conversation with the studio VP. And it was one of those things that was like, okay, so this is surprising. And I had to call him on it. And he said, oh, well, I didn't think that was that big of a deal. I was like, well, you took to arbitration with the star and his executive producer. It absolutely is. It means you're not doing junket, and you may or may not be able to even attend the premiere. And it's just being mindful. There's always an opportunity to step in things. Just know the sensitivity of others as well as yourself. How important it is to just be mindful in all of our interactions, because everyone is sensitive in that space, and we want to kind of honor everyone's journey. And I saw something pop up about extreme dating. I joke it's like speed dating, but you have to kind of have enough conversations to know what your mindset is, what your game plan is with that publicist, to make sure that you guys are a fit and on the same page. It's very similar to with a film, with a sales agent. If they don't see the same outcome for you, they're probably not the best person to sell your film, because they're not going to be looking for that sale.
Thank you. Dustin, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think finding a publicist, there's a lot of PR firms out there and a lot of independent publicists, and there's a huge range of expertise and experience. I think it's always best to start with your network and ask around, get referrals, like Annie said. If somebody's had a good experience, it's gonna be the best way to make those connections on your own. And playing off speed dating, you have to be prepared to ask a lot of questions. Like,
what are those questions? Like, I don't even know what those questions look like.
Sure, but like, what does a PR campaign look like? Like, ask for an honest assessment of how viable you are as a creative to even need a publicist at this point. I think that going through the publicity process, everyone has to be very willing to put the ego aside. And, we work with really talented people day in and day out. But as we know, Hollywood's a big place, and there's a limited amount of space to get coverage. So we often, or at least I know on my end, we're often having very honest conversations. And this happens about programming, this happens about casting, this happens on acting, every level. Not everyone can get press love. It takes a while to build that the awareness and the engagement with media on your behalf. And sometimes it might not be the right time. So really be prepared to ask, am I ready? Is this the right time for me? Here's what I have coming up, and be willing to hear those answers. But like Annie's saying, if your project is connected to a studio or a network, they're going to have the final say on how that product can be brought to the media. And oftentimes they're going to have a hierarchy about who they want to put in front of the artisan writers, or put in front of the trades to represent that project. But also do your own research, search online, find agencies. A lot of them should have their current clients, coverage they've been involved in, look at their social media handles. It is finding, this is a very important relationship, because no matter what the scale of the budget is, that's going to be a lot of money to anybody, and you want to make sure that you're investing that properly.
I mean, when I was talking to Annie the other night, the first couple things she asked me was like, do you see yourself as a studio writer? Are you an indie writer? Are you doing TV, or are you a feature writer? And I was just like, oh, I have to answer these questions. You know what I mean? So I'm just, on the flip side, it's sort of like for writers, I just feel like, so on that note, like, what is a day in your life for, I'm assuming that both of you either now or have done represented writers. So what would a day in the life of your life look like if you're representing a writer for them? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Dustin? Oh, Annie, go.
Okay. Yes. So I have represented writers, editors, as well as, directors in the individual films or series. What I've found to be kind of a day in the life of pitching depending on whether we're at festival or not. It's usually, you know, kind of chasing press in the morning, having maybe a follow-up call that afternoon if we're timed to a premiere or a festival run, and just kind of going over where we're at, making sure they're prepped and ready for interviews. And right now, even though we're supposedly coming out of COVID, Zoom interviews are going nowhere. Everyone on this panel tonight, I guarantee, has done 8-hour Zoom days and will continue to do them. They're not going anywhere. So it's making sure everyone's comfortable, because I can text you while you're doing an interview, but if you're on camera and you're nervous, or if I'm outside of your line of sight in person, it's just making sure you're comfortable, prepping kind of like the 5 to 7 like basic questions, because almost every interviewer will hit at least a few of them.
What are those? I'm just curious.
So usually they'll always be like, congratulations, what was the start or the genesis of this project? What was the most difficult thing? What did you learn? Are you, are you excited to be getting this to, a global audience or a festival audience? What's next for you? They're a bit more kind of basic in the fact that a journalist needs to kind of open and close the interview. So they use those around others that might be more specific to your projects. But it's also just like our days go nonstop. So even if we're not on the phone with the client, we're working on behalf of the client and other clients. We pretty much, from the moment we get up, we're going to the moment we stop.
Yeah, no. You guys have, I don't know how you do it, because it's all night, because then you're going into the red carpet in the evening for so many other things. But
well,
Dustin,
the festival season has started again. I just got back from Austin for the Austin Film Festival.
Yeah. And so Dustin, how do you how does your day go? And then I'll ask you a follow-up on that.
Yeah, I mean, like Andy's saying, we work, PR is in a very interesting kind of Venn diagram of super creative and super corporate. So we're dealing with the Zoom meetings and client calls and new business and developing relationships with media and following up on trends and trade stories and conceptualizing, pitching those, as much as we are on the phone trying to hustle and sell and really share the kind of creative story that our clients have. So day in to day out, it's back to back. It's meetings, it's catching up on emails, it's coming up with creative pitches, it's tracking down who's covering maybe this new angle. It's trying to think of angles and shop those around. We do that, I'm sure Annie, we're constantly seeing what's happening in the zeitgeist, what's tracking with TV and film, entertainment industry, and do we have somebody who can speak to that? And that's something where I think a lot of writers and a lot of the creative behind the scenes can utilize a publicist in small ways or be more involved in media. It's offering comments on something that's happening in the industry. Like the strike was just happening. How's that going to impact projects? When COVID first broke out, we did a series with Variety, where we had some of our casting directors talk about what does their day look like now that we're COVID, like everything blew up. How do we approach that? So always trying to look for ways to, in a positive way, bring your story into larger conversations happening throughout the industry, or connecting trends and themes together. If something really hot is taking off and you have a project that might be in that same space, how can you pitch something that maybe connects the two so you can ride that wave a little bit in an organic way? And then, nights are more writing, more emails, more catching up.
So
But
do you
really
have
finding that
a
time to
list
be
of
creative.
questions that you give all of your people that you're going to deal with? You just I need to know everything about your life known to man, and then that way you can pitch all those however
when we start working with clients, absolutely, we'll grill them like we expect a journalist to. We want to know every detail, the good and the bad. A big piece of it too is people think that our common approach with publicity is to put a positive image out there, but if you're involved in something that could in your history that maybe isn't as positive, it's going to come out. So we need to work with you in advance on mitigating any potential crisis. So we're going to ask questions about that as well, so we're prepared and not surprised or caught off guard. And yeah, we want to know your creative background, your personal story, where you grew up, what inspires you, what your goals are. If there's a specific project that we're talking about, kind of what Annie was talking about, how media would ask, what was the genesis of the project? What was the most successful part? What was the most challenging part? And then your personal story, are you, part of a diverse group? Are you bringing a fresh voice to the industry that hasn't heard your voice before? Because those are really nice ways to tell your story that's beyond just the project. It's kind of adding the human element to what you do as a creative.
So can I ask you, so Annie, I'll ask you, and if Dustin, you can answer too. Do your clients ever come to you and say, hey, I really want to be seen this way? Or, I'm looking to do specifically, I really only want to do anything that has to do with indie movies, and I want nothing to do with any kind of tentpole information, like, are they really specific like that, or just you figure that out for them?
You know what? A lot of times people are actually very specific. They tell you who they are, who they feel they are up front. I will typically ask filmmakers, even though I've watched their films, I always watch it before I take the meeting, and I'll ask them what the two cinematic references they would use as like saying it's X meets Y. Mm-hmm. And the reason I do that is they need to know and be comfortable speaking about their cinematic reference points right off the bat. And also knowing that that's something that, utilizing some of that language and being mindful of it is something in my outreach, because not everyone is going to have the same cinematic references, and we have to be aware of that. So if we're giving them something that they can then kind of chew on, a lot of times that's something that then they'll go a little deeper. So then you get maybe that deeper conversation or interview that is really, poignant, or a review that someone was like, oh, you're referencing these two, but you're also referencing this one, which you didn't mention, but you know what I mean? Like, now you're going farther down the rabbit hole, but oftentimes that's where you get the best pull quotes from, and you really get the best champions for your film, because we're referencing films that they might have absolutely loved.
Right.
And they're realizing that that's your cinematic love language as well, and they're drawing into it. And that's something very specific with film, but I would say with TV as well. Like, it feels like giving them a cheat sheet. It's not. Just know that everyone is fried. They're running it far too high a decibel. So give them a reference point, invite them in.
Thank you. Dustin, what about you? Like, do you, I have a different question for you, just, and that as well, or Adam all. But I have a girlfriend, and she's quite well known, and I noticed that her PR people put her with, like, if she's going to go to anywhere, a fashion show, out to dinner, anything, they'll put her with another person that they have that they're repping. Do you do that? Is that a thing? I didn't even know about that until recently.
I mean, that might be, I'm not a personal publicist, and that seems like something that a personal publicist would do to kind of build more of like the social profile as part of their overall brand. But I would say that, yes, we look to find ways to amplify some of our clients in partnership with others. So there are definitely ways to do that. You definitely don't want to get in a situation. I think this is actually a really good point. You don't want to get in a situation where an agency or publicist is promising you exposure because they happen to also work with somebody very significant.
Yeah.
Because they're lying to you. Like, they're never going to jeopardize another relationship to make you feel, to get your exposure going. Yeah, I mean, but they may use that exposure of a bigger client to say, look how successful I am, and I can do the same for you. So you just want to be careful and like use your gut when having those kinds of conversations. But absolutely, there are ways though on the flip side. Like, when I talk about trend stories, I'm working with, a client that's very well known and a client that's less well known, but there is a theme that connects them. And so we're pitching a trend story, and I can offer both as spokespeople for the story, and hopefully the popularity of one will amplify and elevate the voice of another without me
not, it's very
just
organic.
taking advantage of that relationship.
Yeah.
So there are organic and smart and strategic ways to do it. So, but just be careful with how that's kind of maybe positioned to you.
So when we go there, we shouldn't look up your top people and say, so we want to be with them.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, don't ever go in and say, can you get me a meeting with that other client? Because that's not how it's going to work. Like,
Yeah.
we have to have very like respected relationships
love
with
it.
each of our clients independently, and then hopefully be putting together a roster of clients that are all kind of fit together from a, you know, from a positive way.
Also,
Yeah,
no one should promise anything. Dustin said it brilliantly. You don't promise specific outlets, you promise the work, because that's the outreach, the focus, the creativity that we can absolutely promise. We
Yeah.
can't promise a specific outcome, and anyone who does, your spidey senses should be tingling.
See, that's why we're having you here tonight. These are the things. So I do have another question. So, and now I'm worried that I'm running out of time, but I don't even know. I'm curious for those writers that either don't have something in the moment that is pressing, or a festival or a movie coming out or whatever, how do they sort of, I mean, what's the best thing they can do to keep themselves in the public eye? I'm assuming social media. So I'm curious, like, if you have thoughts on that, ideas on how they can do it themselves, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think social media is obviously a very natural way to get your voice out there. And I think even engaging with media on social media and keeping on top of what writers are covering, what projects are coming up. I mean, we all do that as part of the industry. I would just say that to be a little mindful before reaching out to media on your own and going a bit rogue, because as Annie was laying out before, there are a lot of relationships in the big scheme of how publicity campaigns get executed. Your studio, directors, actors, there's a lot. And inadvertent sharing of information, also known as leaking information, can really create huge issues down the line, and for you professionally and potentially personally. So just be very mindful of how you are sharing information, and keep it more focused on your personality and your creativity versus revealing information about projects unless you've been specifically clear to do so. I would also say, you know, larger agencies, busy publicists can't always make the time, but if you're able to get a personal referral to a publicist, you can always ask for a consultation. You can ask if they do project fees. You know, depending on the scale and scope of the agency, and, you know, it's sometimes possible. I've tried to help out with some advice before, and I know other colleagues will do the same. It's, you know, but at the same time, this is a business, and we have to make sure that our efforts are as, you know, respected and compensated for as you do as writers, and
Sure.
expecting your work to be the same.
If you,
So
yeah.
no, go ahead.
No, I was just.
But
gonna
I would just say,
God
like,
knows
sometimes
we work
go
for
ahead, Sharon,
free
sorry.
forever until we finally sell something. So I
Right,
feel your brother.
Yeah. But I think it's always like, I think somebody who is passionate about what we do in the PR space and passionate about the entertainment industry should hopefully be able to give you a gut check on whether or not it's something to even pursue. And, you know, some PR people are out there who can help you just write a press release or just pitch a couple of stories and see where it goes.
That's good to
There is
know.
a huge scale. Not everyone's going to do it, so don't expect it. But I would say you can keep it in mind. It doesn't have to be a 6-month commitment or a full year retainer. Like, sometimes there's an opportunity to do something on a smaller scale and just ride it out and see how it goes.
That's a good question. Annie, how do you work that? Like, do you do a month at a time or 6 months at a time, or
So typically for most clients, like if they have a studio release, you're only looking at probably a couple months unless you're going a longer awards campaign route. For a film, like a release campaign is usually about 3 months, a little bit more, dependent on what aspect of release. Now, I've had some films even during the pandemic that did theatrical, then they did their TVOD launch, so it was a longer campaign. You're usually starting a couple months out is the standard, just to give enough time, runway, make sure everything's cleared, there's no issues. So it can run that. I've also done just releases for certain clients that, you know, they don't necessarily need me on a day-to-day basis, but they have specific news that they need in the trades.
Gotcha.
Going back to your social media question though,
Yeah.
I always remind people, engaging and creating your social media is a lot of work. It's a full-time job. So make sure you have time for that if that's what you're going to dedicate to. And know that it's a conversation. It's not just you going me, 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 me. You want to, if you want to engage people, if you want people to communicate with you and follow you and feel a part of your journey and community, you need to make it an open conversation. And maybe sometimes that's asking, hey, how does everyone feel about X? You know,
Right.
that's happening in our world.
Right. And then we are almost up, but I'd love to know, like, what do you guys read in the day to get your inside information?
The trades,
Yeah.
the like LA Times, New York Times. I try to get a little bit of the Washington Post and Wall Street Journal, but then also like IndieWire, and I'll look even like EW. I mean, it's throughout the day. It's kind of like I try to catch as much at the beginning of the day, because otherwise it's literally going to be the end of the day, because
Okay.
we get, you know, kind of buried in our calls and our interviews and that.
Thank you. Dustin?
Yeah, I would echo the same. I mean, obviously the
Okay.
trades, that's where we're going to get biggest news from the industry perspective. LA Times, New York Times, of course. I think from a more niche perspective, I do love the AV Club. I think they do some really great editorial. Vulture. I think that those would probably be two of the more broader entertainment that I tend to consume as a consumer, but also covers a lot about the industry.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, I thank you so much for your insight and knowledge. And I know you're going to be back at the end of the different segments for the Q&A. So for now, I'm just going to send it over to my co-moderator, Deborah Meza, for the next segment. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon, and company. We will all be back, and we're looking forward to that. And now I want to welcome two special guests, Mark Pogaszewski, who has long been a friend to this guild and to screenwriters and to independent filmmakers for a long time. His company, MPRM, handles a wide range of both corporate and personal accounts, as well as some really wonderful writer directors, hyphenates, and everybody else in between. And Bibi Lerner, who I'm so happy to meet, actually. And if you want to just go to IMDb Pro and look at her client list, you'll have a great time. We're very lucky to have her. She's back from London, where they were premiering Dune, and that's right between doing the French Dispatch. I'm looking forward to that too. And she is with IDPR, and we're very grateful to have both with us. So welcome, Mark and Bibi.
Thank you, Devin.
Hi, Mark.
Hey, Bibi.
So let's get right to it. Well, as an opening question, just so that our membership can get to know you, you know, most people when they're little kids, they think, I want to be a fireman. I want to be a center fielder. I want to be a ballerina. They don't usually say, I want to be a publicist. So what is it that got you thinking this was your destiny and this is what you guys wanted to be?
Mark, all you.
Oh, no, ladies first.
I don't really know if I had a debt. I wanted to be a doctor. Then I realized there was so much math and I don't math. No. So that was out. And then I wanted to be a lawyer. And then I realized that I could talk my way out of things. I'm an only child, but I could talk my way out of things. And then I was traveling after I left, I was an agent at ICM and I worked in True Stories and I worked with a lot of journalists. And I was traveling to Asia and I saw somebody in the middle of nowhere, like drinking a Diet Coke and eating McDonald's. And I was like, it's all about branding and marketing. I didn't quite know what that meant. So I came back from my trip and then I just started meeting with various people. Like I met with everybody from the heads of studios to, I met a friend of mine who had also left ICM, and he was doing marketing for alcohol. And I was like, oh, I can do that. So I didn't get that job because he already had it. So, but I talked my way into getting a job at his company working with filmmakers.
And the rest is history. And Mark, when did the bug bite you?
I knew pretty early on that I wanted to be in the movie business. I wasn't sure what that was, necessarily what the job would be. I did go to college, Syracuse and Temple University, and I did graduate with a degree in radio, television, film. I knew I wanted to get into film, but I kind of felt like I didn't want to necessarily make them. I wanted to be more on the business side. I moved to California. I had an aunt who lived here, and I got a job at Paramount doing the Paramount News. And this was almost 4 years ago. And that was a really great time in the early 80s to be at Paramount. I did that for about 2 years. And then I kind of looked at what I liked and what my skill set was and what I kind of was interested in being on the lot. And I realized that it was publicity. I was spending a lot of time hanging out in the, at that point, the PR department had their own building on the lot. And I would be there all the time. And what I did was I was writing for a free weekly, and I was working on my job at Paramount was the Paramount News. And I sent out like 50 packages, and I put together a cover letter that said, hire new publicists, receive fabulous prizes. You get, but wait, there's more. And I got a couple of bites, and I got a job at an agency called Klein and Feldman, which was very much the go-to agency for independent movies in the 80s heyday. And I worked on everything from Kiss of the Sly Woman to Sex, Lies, and Videotape to Dirty Dancing to Heathers. A lot of filmmakers, a lot of writers. Worked for Andrea Jaffe for about 2 years. And then when Andrea closed her agency, I decided under what I call the Edith Piaf je ne regrette rien rule that I wanted to do my own thing. Because I figured I could always get a job at Fox or PMK or something.
Yeah. So getting into the meat of what screenwriters have to face as they're going forward to try to get their names out there, so that the end goal basically is always so that you're set up in a way where your next deal is so much better than whatever you have right now. It's all about getting control, getting your stories out. So we are under the auspices of the Inclusion and Equity Committee here tonight. We have a lot of diverse writers under that umbrella, different committees represented. And we're at a time in movie business where more voices are getting to tell their stories. But it's not business as usual in publicity, because these stories are not, middle-aged white guy, dysfunctional white guy saves the planet and long-suffering topless wife reunites, that sort of thing. So when you have these more niche stories that have a target audience, the question then is, and both of you have, your companies have handled that really well. Mark has had John Ridley for 12 Years a Slave, who is also doing Shirley now, on Shirley Chisholm with Regina King, and her company has Hidden Figures and On the Basis of Sex, the RBG story. So the real question is, when you have those kinds of stories that aren't just the typical commercial, usual, all of middle America will run see it, does the PR campaign have to make an adjustment to get it to, so that it finds its audience? And then once that's been done, how do you widen it so that everybody sees how great these stories are? Because if the movies aren't made, don't make money, more of them won't be made. So throw in whatever you can think of that was in there.
That's a
I mean,
lot
I
of
think at
questions.
the end of the
know.
day, it needs to be a good product. So it doesn't matter like how diverse or how I'll just say underground or whatever you want to call it, the story is, or something not as well known. Like, you know, On the Basis of Sex, we work with the writer as well as Mimi Leader. And, you know, it was, we worked really closely with the studio to make sure that we had Mimi's story told, and her story very much mirrored Ruth's story, because she was the first woman who graduated from the cinematography program at AFI, and like she broke all these new grounds, like with the Emmy Awards and things like that. So it was about telling her story, as well as Daniel's relationship with Ruth, being related to her, and making sure that the movie was handled properly and had the right consultants on it that were handling the grassroots insofar as talking to law schools and talking to, you know, female-driven organizations, et cetera. So, you know, I guess that's an example that how you do it if it's not something that's like Eternals.
Yeah.
But yeah, Mark, what do you, and by the way, Mark and I have worked on many campaigns together, including, I think one of the first things we worked on was Memento, because I worked with Chris, and then he and his team worked on the movie, and that was just really eye-opening for everybody, 'cause no one knew what that movie was.
Nope. One of the things, thank you, Bibi. One of the things that I sort of was quote unquote raised with was the idea that if I think it's little, other people are going to think it's little. And when I have a filmmaker or a writer who comes to me and says, "Oh, I wrote this little screenplay," I'm like, stop right there. That word, get it out of your vocabulary. You wrote a special screenplay, but you didn't write a little screenplay. And so for me, and one of the things that I've always felt, you know, in my, is like, I have to make this movie the most important thing to whoever I'm talking to at that moment. And I'm not going to let them, you know, put baby in a corner, so to speak. I mean, and this was like one of the early movies I worked on at Klein and Feldman that this was very much true about was Kiss of the Spider Woman, which everybody thought was like, what is this movie? Who is this movie? And Bruce Feldman, you know, one of my mentors, Klein and Feldman, would not take no for an answer, you know, and push that boulder up the hill. And that was a movie that wound up with 4 Oscar nominations, you know, picture, director, screenwriter, actor, and, you know, 1 for Bill Hurt. So I think, you know, you basically have to, you just have to treat it like it is Eternals, you know.
Exactly. And also I think the term little movie is just at this point, you know, based on budget maybe, but you know, you look at a movie like, you look at any quote unquote independent movie, whatever that even means anymore. And you have Fox Searchlight, which is owned now by Disney. And before that it was owned by Fox. So even though it had a smaller budget, you still have the infrastructure of the system behind you. But then, you know, Mark and I both work on a lot of movies that don't have as deep pockets. You just have to be creative. I mean, we work on a lot of movies like documentaries that do not have deep pockets, that are very important stories that should be told. And you just have to get creative. It's about finding champions and making sure that the story, which at the end of the day is really, that's all that matters, the story resonates with people across the board. You know, like on a movie like, I'll just give the example of Gravity, you know, everybody wanted to write about that movie and the enormity of it and the technology of it. So we let all those stories kind of happen, and Alfonso and Jonas, who's the co-writer, and his son, contributed to that as much as they could. But then we had them kind of go away for about a month. And then we had a rebirth and a resurgence of the campaign when we all took a step back and we realized, like, what's the story of Gravity that's actually going to resonate with audiences outside of the technology and her being in a box and them shooting in a box. And so we took a step back and we're like, you know what, it's about her rebirth and it's about her child and it's about her relationship with her child. So those are the types of stories that we then started going after and going into, and the talking points that we rewrote for Alfonso and Jonas to use while they're on, the awards train. And I'll say that worked.
Okay, so you've got your special movie going, and you're in production, and you have opportunities now to work with the publicist of the studio or the network, or for showrunners or whoever, like we spoke about before, whatever that hierarchy is. And then the writer looks at maybe their contract, and they read something like a clause that says, publicity, artists shall not issue or authorize the issuance of any publicity with respect to this agreement, this movie of the week, whatever it is, without first obtaining said studio's prior written consent. So if
I don't know what that means.
Don't have that prior written consent, what's a writer to do?
But I've never heard of that. And I've never come across that. But, I think that what Mark and I do very well, and I know Mark does specifically, is like, you link arms with the studio or the network, whoever it is, you make them, you're all in the same train together, and everyone has the same goal, is to make whatever the project is successful. And whatever that, and I wouldn't say by any means necessary, but it's like, being great partners. And I feel like that's what, the key to success is. Yeah. And oftentimes, like, Mark works on a lot of individual people, and he also works on a lot of campaigns on content. I work on some campaigns, but I mainly work with individuals. So, I know that there's something in the chat of somebody saying, like, what do you do in between projects? It's like, well, oftentimes we don't have clients that are on in between projects because they generally don't need us. However, if there's incoming calls, of course, like, we don't ignore them. But usually our writers get to the point of they're also producers. So we always have something to do in the in-between times of not having something tangible to promote.
I would also say that first of all, in reference to that clause, as I think I said to you, Deborah, in one of our previous conversations, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. So you might just want to keep that in mind.
Put it on a pillow.
Right, good on a pillow. The other thing is, I think this is where this sort of in-between period is where your social media can be really important. Your thought leadership can be important. Maybe you see something, happening that makes you want to write a byline piece somewhere, give your opinion. I mean, what's happening today also, and I think BB and all of the publicists on this panel would agree, the press has been decimated, decimated. They are being asked to do more and more with less and less resources. And sometimes it's even hard to get a yes or a no. You know what I mean? I mean, I think people are even finding, like, okay, if I sent them 5 emails and they never responded to one of them, that's probably a no. And which is a shame because the feedback would be helpful. But I think there are things to do. But to DB's point also, chances are you don't need a publicist 12 months out of the year, at X thousands of dollars a month.
So what are some suggestions that writers should know if you're their publicist and they're negotiating a deal, their agent, their entertainment attorney is negotiating a deal? would you get on the phone with their reps and say, hey, you know, you need to have A, B, and C in that deal so that this clause isn't there and so that they can let us do our job? What are some of those things that you would like the agent and the attorney to include in there to make sure the writer gets?
Beeb, I'm going to throw that one to you.
Yeah, thank you. As I do this almost daily. You know, I think it's about if the writer is not on set the whole time, and they're not needed, to be honest, because sometimes like they have on set writers, etc. And the writer still likes the project and wants to still be connected to it and is still getting writing credit. You know, it would be awesome if they have the opportunity that the studio will pay for to have them come to set and then, you know, either working for a day or 2 days or whatever it is, just visiting. And then also, you know, when you're doing promotion, hopefully the agent or the manager or the attorney whoever's negotiating it should ensure that they get, it sounds so simple, but it's like, you know, 2 first-class tickets to the worldwide premiere and travel and accommodations, etc. And then if they need 2 tickets or 4 tickets to the actual physical event, they should make sure that's all contractual, because every studio falls back into the contract and what they have to pay for. We're dealing with it right now with a client that we really want to have go to the first premiere, but they're calling it a special screening, which is how the studios get out of transporting writers places and people places.
Using words against us, so deviant.
I know, I know. But all that language should be in there, and so the writer's agent, attorney, whoever it is, should make sure that that language, including special screening, which is what we have in a writer's contract right now, and he's a first-time writer, and the studio is like, no, we don't have to bring him. I'm like, look at the contract. And it's just because I know this, I know the attorney, I didn't even know the client that well, but the attorney asked me, he's like, I'm doing a deal for a first-time writer, what do I do? So I just made the suggestion and he's included.
These are great suggestions. I mean,
Also,
you want
you may
pictures
wanna-
on the set.
You want to make sure that the writer gets interviewed for the EPK. I don't know
Yeah.
if that needs to be in the contract, if that's something that becomes contractual.
Yeah, because good point. They usually need the writer or whoever the writers are. They need their voice in whatever type of production information that they're handing out to the media.
Right.
So that's the electronic press kit.
Yes.
And
the written press kit.
And the written press kit, and maybe get on the DVD or something. But the point of getting on the set is so important for 2 reasons, which brings us to sort of the next question. One is, it's nice to have pictures that you're actually involved in something in case you ever want to write a biography that people actually want to read. This sort of puts you in that place and time. But also, very often when we have panels like this and it's actors and doing a show that they're talking about, the first question will always get, how did this project come to you? And those actors will often say, well, there was this great director attached, or I wanted to work with this other actor and the script was really good. And they mentioned that name of the agent who gave it to them, but they rarely mention the name of the writer. It's like they haven't met him, so they don't remember, or they don't know. So the question, I guess, is how can we, or even how can the Writers Guild, and how can we as writers, I mean, I know it's not your day-to-day thing, but since you're gurus in this field, are there any suggestions you have for how we can raise the profile of writers in general to be understood to be equal partners in this, you know, the ones who invent something from nothing and then are the ones whose names are forgotten? How do we get our names into people's mouths?
I think it's a challenge. I mean, we discussed this yesterday. It's a challenge because oftentimes if you write a script, you oftentimes are sharing credit with other people. So, you know, I have the opportunity right now. We just went through client just went through arbitration and found out today he's getting sole credit, and which is awesome. But until now, we've had to do cleanup on IMDb, on any sort of stories that have come out about the movie that they're like a script by blah and blah. So now it's like, it's only by our client, blah, but he was on set the whole time. And because the director needed him because it wasn't a writer director. And so he was intrinsic to having, you know, to talking about the character development and stuff like that. So the writers, he was so important to the story. and to the actors, that the actors just leaned to him when he needed to, when they wanted a line or a rewrite or something like that. So I think it's tricky, you know, being on set, or maybe it's just part of talking points maybe for the talent when they're doing interviews. There's not a really right answer to it, other than, especially a movie like Bond that just had what, like 9 writers on or something like that. Like it's a slippery slope.
Mark, any
Mark, what
thoughts?
would you do?
I would become very friendly with the unit publicist.
It's a very good point.
If there was, assuming there is one, you know, and I would reach out to the studio publicist.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I think a personal, you know, whatever, you know, I mean, and this is probably the wrong thing to say, but, and if it was important for me to be on the set, you know, as the writer, and nobody was paying for it, I might get myself to the set. You know, if I thought it would make, if I thought it would ultimately make a difference.
So in your day-to-day conversations with unit publicists and studio publicists and those that who's best, when you're trying to advocate for the best interests of your clients to be included, what are some of your seductive techniques in how you get them to, do you just pitch them sort of relationships with media that you have? Do you come in with a whole pitch of what you think would be great for them to do? Or do you just put something in their ear and inquire? What are some of your great techniques for that?
You catch more flies with honey than with vinegar.
Yeah, it's like to Mark's point, like if you have the opportunity to go to set, you know, it sounds so simple, but like bring a bottle or bring like a gift or something like that, something they'll remember you, that the unit publicists remember you by. But at the same time, it's never, every situation is different. There's nothing blanket about it. Like they can have a great relationship with the studio executive, and the studio executive just kind of always talks about them and their script with the talent, because the studio executive is often on set. So maybe that's the way in. I don't know. There's no right answer.
So since you guys are handling so many clients, and I know they all have peak events throughout the year, you do a lot of traveling. How do you resolve when, you know, there's things going on here, but you've got the premiere over here, and the writer is now trying to get something else established over there? So is it just that you've always got your team working for you? What can the people listening expect if, say, they hired you as their publicist, but you had to go to London for Dune? What would be happening if something was happening in their world, which for them would be Dune-like, even though it doesn't seem that way to the rest of the world?
For me, there's never a big conflict like that, because I know, you know, my team and I, who I don't want to say team just because I think everyone is equal. There's a cadence to every campaign. So I know where I personally need to be and where I can also lean into other people to support and to go. Like, we're doing all this stuff for a movie in 2 weeks in New York, and I'm not going. One of my colleagues is going to go, and she's already going to be there. And so she's going to spend time with the client that she's actually not even on the team of, but because of her, I just introduced her to him and he already feels comfortable with her. Great.
I second that.
Me, I suppose, but yeah.
So Mark, you a big champion of independent films. You also do corporate and personal. How do all of these different hats sort of get worn at the same time? And is your approach varied depending on those different aspects?
I mean, again, like Bibi said, you're hiring a team. You know, you're hiring NPRM, the agency. And, you know, what we always do, like, I'm going to set up an email that's Deborah Meza at nprm.com that will go to the 3 or 4 or 5 people on that team so that nothing gets dropped. There's always somebody who is up to speed, knows what's going on, and can respond. Most of my travel is around festivals rather than individual, you know, events like the premiere of Dune. So you know, I'm a Sundance, Toronto, Cannes kind of guy. That's where most of my stuff comes in. But ultimately, you know, there's me, I'm handling strategy, I'm involved in big picture. There's, you know, an account executive, there's an assistant, there's another account executive. It's a staff, it's a group of people working for the betterment of your client. And
So there's always someone home.
there's always
So
someone
that's
home.
great. So let's take a poll. So let's ask everyone, because we just talked about this.
Uh-oh.
And I'll qualify it. So everybody who's at this meeting today, at this Zoom meeting today, has had something sold to get in here. So you've all had either a network or a studio or a production company at some point that you had a relationship with. Were you ever contacted by their publicity department, specifically you, the writer, to do PR? So this isn't about if you've ever had a PR agent. It's about whether or not you were contacted by the company that purchased your script, whose set you were on, and whether or not you were contacted to do publicity. Let's see the results. What have we got? Oh, well, that's even better than I thought, but 70% said no. So it just sort of hits home on why they need their own PR person.
Where are the other 200 people? I guess everybody didn't.
No,
take it.
70%.
No,
I think.
but
Was it
40, there were only 44 responses.
Well, maybe they were the ones who can think of when they were in production. But anyway, it's still a lopsided answer. So basically, it sort of proves the point that they could use some help if they're not getting it from the studio and they want their best interests looked after. They probably need to hire someone, and they can do that per project. But of course, that brings us to that same question, which I know you guys have great ideas on, which is, if you can't afford, you know, what are some things that writers can do for themselves to bring attention to themselves and their projects?
This is, I think, where, again, social media can be helpful. It's something that, you know, wasn't around, you know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, the way it is now.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think this is where this is where getting friendly with the studio publicist is probably not the worst idea.
Yeah,
You know,
because
a
as soon as
bottle
they
of
have like,
champagne and then
yeah.
some flowers go a long way.
Exactly. And if, you know, if there's social media assets and things like that, that they're sending out, the studio or the network is using, you want to make sure that the writer is getting, you know, the same social assets as everyone else is around at the same time.
And anything else to keep your hand in when your name isn't on the list of films being produced besides social media?
Thought leadership. You know, well, but at that point you don't have us. So, I mean, you know, there are panels, there's, you know, there's the AFM, there's the AFI, there are places. And again, maybe you try and place an editorial somewhere. Maybe you have something that you are passionate about. You know, maybe there's something besides your screenwriting that is, you know, to get back to Dustin and Annie talking about, you know, the story and your story. I mean, there are many facets to the diamond.
Yeah, that's great advice. And getting stuff in an article is also wonderful, because now you have something people actually can read, and you can send it to agents and other people as well. Just make sure to mention you're a screenwriter in the first paragraph. That was advice I once got. Can't do it all the time, but yes. All right, so the last question, just to wrap it up, is you've both had mentors at some point, or PR people you admired. Mark mentioned one. Let's give an answer to the people coming up. If you are now in the position to be the mentors, what is the opening advice that you would give someone who's looking up to you?
to look who is interested in being a publicist,
It's
learn
interesting
how to
being-
write, learn how to write a sentence, and internships. We're big on internships.
Yeah,
I mean,
I will
that's
fully
sort of
admit,
like, oh, and don't get a master's. You don't have to get a master's.
yeah.
Wasted that then. Okay, no.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
love that. I love that. I love that, Mark. It's like I will fully admit I don't write 100% awesomely. However, I can pitch my little heart out. And I think it's also about, hi Billy. It's about, relationships with the media, with the press, and getting to know them really well. Like there's a joke in my company always of like, I know, everyone's first significant other, their second significant other, and the names of their children, and the names of the children they're going to have, as well as the names of their dogs, and where their second homes, their third homes are. But yeah.
Well, then that all works out because we're happy to be the writers anyway. So thank you so much. I want to remind everyone that Mark and BB are going to come back in the last segment to answer your questions. And now I'm going to throw it to Vertice Emile Brown, who's going to introduce her panelists for the next segment. Thank you very much. We'll see you soon.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Bibi. Thank you, Mark. I want to introduce my wonderful publicists on the panelists, Jane Labonte and Tony Thompson. So we're going to start off with everybody's got a beginning. So please share with us your origin story, what kind of publicity you do, what you are currently handling about publicity, include film festivals as well. And I'm going to start with you, Jane.
Oh, okay, thank you. Well, as you can probably tell, I'm not local. And I actually started off in PR as an intern at BWR. And I really wasn't going to go into PR. I wanted to be a war correspondent. And I don't know how I ended up in PR actually, but I started working at BWR and they were moving offices. And I'd only been an intern for 2 weeks. And I went to look at the big board where everybody was sitting. I thought, oh, they've given me a nice desk. And Larry Winoka walked by and said, hey, didn't we tell you we're hiring you? And that's how it started. Awesome. And I started off in events and we worked a lot with a lot of awards related events. And then I moved into television and film. A lot of it was release. And then from there, I went to pretty much solely into awards. I worked at the Oscars, I worked at Sony, I worked at Disney, I've done HFBA campaigns, Emmys, Oscars, film. And about 5 years ago, I moved exclusively into, well, I say exclusively, I pretty much work in television now. BritBox, Epics, Facebook Watch, all kinds of different campaigns.
Nice, thank you, my dear. And Tony, how did you get started?
Hello.
Hello.
So I started my career as a film publicist, well, actually as an assistant at 20th Century Fox, and eventually got recognized and got a job as a publicist working at MGM United Artists. I did that for a couple years. And I would say probably my big break was becoming the publicist for the Oscars. I actually met Jane Labonte my very first year. I was young and green and Jane was experienced, but she was very kind to me and showed me the ropes. And I ended up doing that show for the better part of 13 years. And in between doing the Oscars, which was a big chunk of my life every year, I would do other shows. And I have experience working with the Golden Globes, American Music Awards, BET Awards. I've sort of, jumped around, but I would say that I've become, my two big experiences are with film and with awards shows, but not awards campaigns. I'm more of an awards show publicist, which is still relevant to the conversation, I think. But just to be clear, I have not done campaigns, but that's pretty much my story.
Can you, just to jump on the topic, can you and Jane share with us what working on an award show means? Like, what specifically were you doing? And so, in fact, can you just kind of take us from, since we're talking about the Oscars, from the start of the season to the end, what that looks like? Yeah, so I'm going to turn it over to you guys.
Actually, I'll let Tony run with this one because it's been a while since I actually worked on the show. On a show, I usually work on campaigns, actually, for shows, and yeah.
Sure, thanks, Jane.
Sorry.
So, no, not at all. So award season, oh my God. So from the campaign, or not from the campaign side, but from award show side, it's pretty intense. And Jane and I both, when Jane was there, and then when I sort of moved up a little bit, we worked on mostly things that had to do with anything that happened inside the theater. Meaning we were very, I mean, of course we worked the red carpet and we were intrinsic to the planning and writing press releases. But as the show publicists, we were really about getting stories for the director, the producers, and the talent that would be on the show. Basically everything leading up to the show, trying to get as much ratings as we could on the show. So it was very intense. It would start anywhere from 3 months before to as things got bigger and grew more, and we started to make more effort and started to try to get magazine articles. It went all the way up to like 6 months before the show. I would begin working, but we would be on site for probably the last week before the show, doing as much as we could to drum up interest, integrating in working with all of the press that would be on site, just trying to drum up as many stories as we could, or as they could, basically to get eyes on the show that big night. So that's what
you would do. I'm just going to jump on something that you just mentioned before I go to Jane with this question. So being a show publicist basically entails working with the director of the Oscars, the producers of the Oscars, the writers of the Oscars, the hosts of the Oscars. And so you would do junkets per se, where the media would come in and interview the talent. Is that sort of
So we would capture interviews almost any way we could, literally.
Okay.
Like, so yes, there would be a form of a junket, not in the traditional theater, in the sense that like film or television does, but we would say bring in ET, Access Hollywood, and Good Morning America, and we would run them through what we would call the gauntlet, bring them in the theater through the back door and make them go out through the side door and have them do interviews with the host or perhaps the producer or whatnot. As well, we would do interviews on the carpet. We would literally do as much as we could on the carpet with any press who were out there. Like, for instance, all of the news shows would be out there 3 days before, just looking for content, looking for stuff. So we would host press conferences or what, or for instance, we do a foreign language film award at the Oscars. So we would have the foreign language directors come in, because they would normally not come in until a day or two before. So that would be a big thing that we could put them out for and get them some PR for their films, right before the show aired. And yes, of course, we would try to get writers, particularly in this instance, it would be about the writers on the show. So we would be your John Max and your Bruce Melanches, and sometimes famous writers, sometimes not so famous, but we would definitely try to get them either behind the scenes. For instance, I remember one time getting Bruce Melanch to walk around the theater, and he couldn't talk about what was going to happen on the show because that was the big rule. You can't give anything away, but he would walk around and show people stuff about the theater or about making a show that they wouldn't otherwise get to see. And it was great for me because then I had a funny person, a person who liked being on camera, and it was a win-win for everybody.
Awesome. And so, Jane, you actually worked on an award show campaign. Can you kind of take us from start to finish? Like, when would that start? What would it entail? And when would it end?
Actually, yes, I will in a second, but I just wanted to wrap something with what Tony said. One year, I actually did do a junket for a producer, and I actually put it together just exactly like a film or a television junket would be. He wasn't having a good time, and so we put the junket together for him. But anyway, moving on. So, sorry, what was your question?
Just walk us through an awards campaign, what that looks like from start to finish, because as a writer and as hyphenates, you know, the first time you go into something that's maybe the project has a little win, a little, what do I want to say, momentum about it, and you go into your first award show, whether it's the Oscars or BET or BAFTA, or if it's a notable film festival, there is some anxiety about that. So basically, I'm asking you to kind of like walk us through what to expect.
Okay, so I'm currently working as an Emmy publicist, and I do all of the award shows in between. So literally, when I started to put together a strategy or a timeline, I actually did it after the Emmy nominations this year. So I've already started working a long time ago on next year's Emmys. So part of that strategy is we take a look at the shows and what shows are for consideration. And at that point, sometimes they aren't even, they're still in post. Sometimes they're still being shot, but we always read the scripts, and we always take a look at the cast, and we always take a look as best we can, the actual product, if we can actually watch it. Now, it's a little, I know this probably sound a little cold-hearted, but it's my job to actually take a look at things and evaluate what is potentially an awards category and what might be branding. So one of our biggest jobs is to manage expectations. Somebody said it earlier. I actually wrote this down. So it's like, we can do the work, but we cannot promise the results, which is why we do have to manage the expectations, because you have to step back and look. And the first thing you have to really look at, as well as the product, the TV show, is you have to look at your budget. There is a lot of the HBOs and Netflix, the Amazons, they have big, deep pockets. And some of these other streamers, even though you know who they are and they're successful, they just don't have that budget. Mm. So we have to step back, look, we have to. And sometimes we do submissions. So the first thing is the submissions. So we actually look at that and decide, you know, are we going to submit for the ADGs, ADGs, the CDGs, you know, the sound? What are we going to do? We always submit for the show, which is the PGAs, the DGAs, and of course the writers. We always do that. We always have to ask first to make sure that they want to be submitted, because not everybody does. So it basically starts off during the summer it started off in the summer where we put the strategies together. And then what we do is we always ask when a show is coming out that we are part of the team that's doing the release, the premiere for the TV show. So when the PR firms are on, we're all on the Zoom calls and they're discussing strategies for release of the film or of the TV show. That's when we'll also ask, because we want to be part of that. We want to make sure that our voices are heard, because we're not in it for the short haul. You know, when a TV show drops, a lot of it will be you do your initial publicity and then they move on to the next show. We can't think like that. We have to think like a marathon runner, because if your show drops in September and the Emmys and the WGA and they're all voting 5 or 6 months later, we have to still put that show in front of the voters. So it is a long haul strategy. So we always ask if we can be there right at the very beginning. And we also make sure that we talk to our awards writers as well to make sure we put the show in front of them as well.
Nice.
A lot of it is being creative, and it's keep putting it in front without being pushy. So it's like constantly having to, it's a very, very loud landscape award season, as I'm sure you know. It's very loud and everybody's pushing. But you just have to be creative, a budget, and a strategy. And sometimes that strategy just turns around on a dime. It really does. And you just have to go with it.
Awesome. So I'm going to ask you both this question. So let's say there is a show that's really hot, whether we're going through the Oscars, BET, Emmys, that's really hot and has a lot of buzz around it. But obviously the announcements haven't come out yet. What are some of the do's and don'ts if you're a writer, if you're a writer director and you're working on a show that everyone's talking about? What are some of the do's you would say that, okay, we're going into award season, this is something you should do, or what are some of the don'ts?
Well, okay, I personally, because I work on the show itself or a film, I work a lot with the studios or the networks. And they're the studio publicists or the network publicists are the ones that do a lot of the talent handling. But I will say this, I think it's really key if you are in that position that you do get yourself a publicist or you do talk to your studio publicist, because it is the job of a studio publicist to get publicity any which way they can. And if that means it's a cinematographer, the director, the actors, and the writers get pushed to the background, that's just the way it rolls. I know that's a little harsh to say it, but unfortunately, that's the way it is. We have to get the publicity any which way we can.
Gotcha. And Tony?
Well, I would add to that, say, for instance, if you're nominated, if you obviously this is after you've gotten a publicist and after you've had a project and it's actually got some meat to it that the publicist can work with, I'd say, and I know Mark and Bibi know this well, is, your talent has to be willing to go the extra mile, like Jane was saying. And sometimes that means things like, when you show up at the Oscars, you cannot have an ego and you cannot show up when Angelina Jolie is showing up. You have to show up in the very beginning. Listen, right now, writers are probably more interesting and more diverse, and there's so much there for them. And I think it's like a great time for writers, but you still have to show up early, because as soon as Angelina comes by, it doesn't matter how badly they want to talk to you, they're going to stop talking to you, or they're not going to want to talk to you, because that's just the way, the water rolls, right? So, but yes, I think right now, writers have personality, and, often they're multi-hyphenate and they have these really interesting background stories. And so I think also, because there's so much content out there and there's so much competition, that it gives more ability and more space. I mean, your red carpets are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and there's so many people to talk to. So all of that, I think, bodes well for writers, but they still do have to show up early, and they do need a publicist for those events, because it's hard to push yourself. You get on that carpet and, you're kind of a deer in headlights. You need somebody who's willing, like a BB learner, to go up there and show that name and say, this is my client, talk to my client. This is who they are. And I think that will help a lot, but you obviously have to get to that point.
Awesome. And actually,
yeah, I would actually, yes, definitely second that. I've done a lot of red carpet work too, and I've done some recently. And I've always had the client show up really early, because like you said, when Angelina Jolie shows up, you always get pushed to the back. And unfortunately, that really is just the way it is. But one of the other things is to contact the press ahead of time. Have your publicist do that. and arrange interviews so that when the publicist arrives before you do, then they will have already approached the journalist, confirmed the interview. And I've often found too that now a lot of them are doing streamers and they're doing it live, or they're doing some, you know, some kind of video. And I've always liked that because that's the one that usually goes up on the site as opposed to just plain print.
Awesome. So I'm going to actually go back on something that Tony, you mentioned about the red carpet. So choose any award show that you're vibing with right now and talk about what the red carpet looks like, because I am familiar with this. I'm not so familiar with, but I know that people, it's a suggested time when you should arrive on the red carpet. Does that go out to all of the invited talent? And then can you also talk about some of the media that are on the carpet? Like, what if my show has been nominated, what, as a writer or writer director, or, you know, maybe I'm a producer in this, like what steps or what should I expect when I arrive on that carpet? Tell me, kind of walk me through that process.
Yes, well, that's a lot. And interestingly enough, right now, and it's been this way for a while, every carpet is completely different. You know, you have, but let's just assume that we're talking about a person who's arriving, who is either doing a film premiere and they are one of the writers, hopefully the writer on the film, or it's an award show and they are nominated, right? So so absolutely what Jane said, and any publicist worth their salt is reaching out. First of all, we know that a lot of press are going to be there, and they're going to be very, very busy, and they know in advance who they want to talk to. So if your publicist has not reached out to them before that day, it's not likely you're going to get interviewed. So it's really important to have a publicist when you're nominated for something. That goes without, I hope, without saying, that everybody, if nothing else, secure someone for the month or two during award season, the most crucial time that you're nominated. And you go on that carpet, and it is quite a surreal experience, which I'm sure most of you have been on carpets before, but to be one of the people who's nominated is really exciting, and something you want to experience, and you want it to be the best experience, meaning you want a publicist who is taking care of every aspect for you, so that when you arrive, when you get there, you're not confused, you're not a deer in headlights, you're prepared, you have, you know those satiant things that you would like to say or get out about your project, and hopefully projects that are upcoming for you too, right? But the carpet is full. I mean, we can talk about the SAG Awards, or we can talk about the Golden Globes or the Oscars. Those are very similar in that they are just jam-packed with press, international press, as you know, but also domestic, there's radio, there's everything. So you really have to, and you can't do them all. So you just want to make sure that you get a few really good interviews out of that carpet, and you'll be good.
Awesome.
Did I answer the question?
Yes. Jane, would you like to talk about any red carpet things that people should know before they arrive on the carpet, and also include film festivals, because there's a different energy in doing the carpet for, let's say, the Venice Film Festival or Cannes, as it is to, let's say, Oscars or Writers Guild or any of the other award shows or Emmys.
I was just want to say to any writer that if you don't have a personal publicist and you are working with a studio or a network or a streamer, call up the PR department, ask them what they need, ask them how you can work with them, put yourselves out there. I mean, I'm not saying get in the face, but I'm just saying, make yourself available and easy to work with. We always appreciate that. We really do. And I think that sort of helps a lot. My film festival has been Cannes, and that's a whole different kettle of fish. Again, if you're a writer and you are going to go to one of the big film festivals, you need to have a conversation. You either, if you, and you don't have a personal publicist, you do need to have a conversation with the studio and find out what is expected of you, and ask them straight out. You know, sometimes writers, they have a relationship with their screens, and sometimes they're not always the most forthcoming ones. And, you know, sometimes directors and producers and actors, they can easily push themselves forward. And I think it's up to the writer to do that for themselves.
So I'm going to sort of spin off of what you said, is that if you're a writer and your project, if you're solely just the writer and one of your projects does go through award season, is to really insert yourself into the conversation that I'm available to do interviews.
Yes,
I'm
yes.
available for
Yes.
Screenings and red carpet appearances.
Yes.
If it gets to the point of when, again, you're nominated, I will arrive on the carpet ahead of time. So it sounds like what both of you are saying is that start building out your own publicity first, as soon as your project has some buzz. And maybe a part of that publicity is like having a headshot or having a good picture, having some written material about you, and then go and hire that publicist that who's going to represent just you, but insert yourself into the conversation with the studio publicist.
Yes, let them know that you're available for panels, but also if you're working with a studio, or, you know, I'll just say a studio or a network, ask them what the talking points are, ask them what it is how they're going to be promoting the show. I mean, you are the writer, but there comes a point where you have to put your ego to one side, because the publicist's job is to sell the show and to have, you know, people watch it and get awards and brand and all the other. But, you know, be open, just ask, and they'll come back with talking points for you. They'll, you know, we love that stuff.
Nice.
If people help us, we love it.
Nice. So Tony, both of you do events, but you also do events. And again, in the world that we're in right now, everyone is like a hyphenated. You can't just be a writer or a director or a showrunner. I mean, you've got to really have your hands in like different pots. So can you talk a little bit about like the energy or the materials you need when you start to do some of the events you've been involved in? Like what suggestions do you have for people going into it? And I'm going to give it an example. I recently went to a screening, and one of the things that they had, this was an in-person screening, which was a little bit unusual, but felt a little nervous. But one of the things that they had is they also had a museum. They were doing like a gallery installation to promote their film as well. And I know sometimes people have concerts to promote material or something having nothing necessarily to do with the film itself. Maybe it's something political. It's a political film and they want, so can you talk a little bit about like event publicity and what that looks like?
Well, I think it goes back to some of what Bibi and Mark was saying earlier, that you know, having social media and having a point of view, a perspective, and hopefully one that is politically correct, right? But, you know, standing up for causes and having something that you care about is really relevant, and it will give your story, which is another point. I think writers should have stories, right? I've noticed that writers are really interesting. And I look up to them a lot because what someone said earlier is they really create something from nothing, right? There's a lot of creativity that I don't have, that I admire. And I think often they have very interesting stories. So they should be prepared to share their story. And it's something I think Mark mentioned, tell your story to your publicist and be willing to go into the information about your background, because I mean, look at, for instance, Diablo Cody. I mean, boy, what a story that she has, her life prior to like striking it with Juno, right? So, and that gave her story so much life and so much more. And I'm certain that it was all of that press that she got in about her story, and the fact that the movie was good, that really propelled her career, I think, in a lot of ways. So yes, you have to, it's great to have something that you can rely on or go to, even just be charitable, participate. If you're a writer and you don't have a project right now, then what kinds of charities are you involved with? Like, get your name out there, because I think in a lot of ways, PR, and I do PR other than award shows and events, and the PR that I do that often is not as glamorous or as easy in some respects is that PR that you have to build on, that PR where, like, we were all talking earlier, that it's I'm sorry, some of the other panelists were talking earlier, is just it's like a direct mail campaign. Like, you have to have relationships as a publicist to get the ball rolling, but also it's like, I put someone in front of I might pitch them, or I might send them something, and the first time they see it, it's not really right. And they might see it a couple times in different ways, in different languages, or it might be a different movie, but we are building on the recognition of that person. And you want the people to, this press person or multiple press people who you've been talking to, eventually that name is going to start to sound familiar, or they're going to see them on something else, or they're going to be on a carpet and see them and go, oh my God, you're Mark's client, you're Tony's client. Come here. I actually do have a question. I want to know what you think about this. So yeah, a lot of it's about putting in work that sometimes doesn't seem to pay off in the very beginning. But eventually, if you keep to it and you stick with it, and you have people who are really working on your behalf, it will start to make a change. But sometimes it does take time. And so you have to be patient, and you have to understand that, like, there are no guarantees in PR, which everyone also said. There are no guarantees that, and I am so careful not to ever tell my clients that I can absolutely do something. I can tell them that I feel good about something, that something they have is super exciting, and I think lots of other people will be excited about it, but I cannot tell them for sure I can get you LA Times, for sure I can get you Entertainment Tonight. There's just no way I can do that. So that's my 2 cents.
Awesome. And Jane, I'm going to turn it over to you. We've got our 2-minute warning, so I'm going to save my final question for the team. But Jane, please share with us.
Sorry?
I said, please share with us.
I forgot what I was going to say. Sorry. Just to follow up on that. I forgot what I was going to say. I had something in my head and it's gone. Sorry.
No worries. So I think we've got to go to Q&A, and so if we could have all of our wonderful publicists back on the screen, along with our team of moderators, that would be awesome. So I'm just going to interject this question because I feel like everyone's got something very unique about them, and just so our audience gets to know you as well, if each of you could share with us, before we go to people's questions, if you could share with us like a wild card story about yourself and publicity, that would be amazing. So I'm going to open this up, and Jane, since we ended with you, I'm going to begin with you.
Oh, can you send it over to somebody else? Because I'm thinking.
Sure, sure.
Because it's sort of hard. I don't want to name names, and I don't want to put anything,
Absolutely. Well, you know what? I will move over to Tony then.
You're muted, Tom.
Thank you. A wild card story. Okay, so when you say that, you mean something interesting about my career, or
I mean, both. I like to say, you know, a wild card is something that someone, when they look at you, they wouldn't know that about you. So I'm going to just throw out one of my wild card stories, which tends to take people by surprise. So as a writer, I'm motivated or inspired by different kinds of things. And my wild card story is I'm actually a huge Metallica fan. So, and that does infuse itself into my work as a writer, into my work as an artist. So your wild card story could be something personally about you that, you know, that's different and unique, or it could be something specifically that happened to you that was sort of out of the blue, something that, a story that you have that was crafted by something that you personally were a part of.
So I think that the thing that we probably haven't touched on much is diversity, right? And you know, I sort of grew up in the studio system, and I was not I mean, I was an assistant, and I had no idea that I would grow up to be this publicist who got to work on the Oscars and be on the red carpet with so many famous people. And it really does humble me. And I can say that two things that that strike me about my career and life. One is that there were moments in my career where I took a chance, where I looked at someone and I asked for something, or I said something to bring attention to myself, not in a fake way, but just in a way in which it made them stop and notice me. And then, but basically it was always, whether it was always being very pleasant or saying hello to, like, literally, I worked for 20th Century Fox and I was an assistant, and the president of marketing and distribution, who is now passed away, but he was very instrumental in my career, would walk by my desk and he wouldn't talk to me at first. And he, you know, I wasn't, you know, he was just walking by, and he would, you know, just wasn't important because, I mean, no disrespect to him. It just wasn't someone on his, you know, whatever. But I had started to notice that he was losing weight and he was changing his clothes, and he was starting to look different. And so I said to him one day when he walked in, I go, Tom, oops, I said his name, you look really great. And I said, your hair, you know, your whatever. And I didn't have a connect. I mean, really, he knew who I was, obviously, but like, I never really spoke to him. And then every time he'd come in, he'd say hello to me, you know, and I would say hi. And that moved on to me. Whenever his assistant wasn't around, he would have me come work for him. He would take me from my boss, and I would, because he was higher up, right? So, so the one point is just in general for all of us, like, you don't know where you're going to land. You don't know who you're going to interact with, and I believe in being kind to everyone. And you never know where that's going to lead you in your career. And the other thing is, as a part of that, as a publicist for the Oscars for many years, I have been underestimated. People, you know, I looked younger, I'm very petite. And for a long time, I felt, not a long time, but there have definitely been instances in my career where I was disregarded because no one thought that this young Black woman was actually the person who was in charge of, you know, some very important things. But then on the, so again, we should always be courteous and kind to everyone, and think about, you never know where someone's going to be from one day to the next, right? But also, I have much gratitude for, you know, where I've come and what I've gotten to do in my career. So we should think about those things when we're working with people.
Awesome. And Mark?
Like Jane, I'm like, what was the question? Wow.
Well,
I actually have mine down now. I actually know mine.
I mean, this is not a secret necessarily, but there was when I was deciding whether or not to open my agency or not, there was a client I had that was paying what was then a great fee, and even today would still be a good fee. And they basically said to me, they called me in and wanted to know what I was going to do. And I said, I want to open my own, do my own thing. And they said, if you do that, you can keep this account. And so I knew I wouldn't starve. And so that was basically the start of what was then the Pogaszewski company. I think the thing for a lot of us, and when I think about sort of my long and illustrious career, is that they're like, it's like moments. There are moments. It's like, I worked on LA Confidential. LA Confidential went to Cannes. There was a party and like, it was just, there was a moment, you know, and I think things like that, particularly with like the Oscars for Tony, or red carpets or festivals, or, you know, like being in the back of a theater, you know, at the end of Cinema Paradiso or Dirty Dancing, you know, because we were covering the screenings, or, you know, any where you just feel that you watch something and you feel that chill. I think that's kind of, that's a little stream of consciousness. And the thing, just to make one comment about something that Jane said, the thing about Cannes, if you go, is you don't have to talk to anybody on the red carpet. You actually just walk up the big red stairs. So, which is a very different experience than what we're used to here. So anyway, back to you, Vertice.
Awesome. And BB?
So the question, because it was 107 years ago, is what was like the moment that it all clicked? Like, what was the?
It's a wild card story. Either the story is something personal and unique to you and your experiences, or it's something about your work. And everyone, again, has that wild card thing like, wow, I can't believe I did that, or I was a part of that campaign.
Well, I remember, like, I'll just give you a quick example because it goes back to a writer. I remember watching Argo, and I've gone to Telluride now almost 2 decades. Because I work with the festival. So I remember watching Argo in like the pop-up screening that they had, a special screening for patrons on Friday afternoon. And as soon as the movie ended, I said to myself, I need to represent the writer because I can get him nominated. So within like 10 minutes, I was on the phone with the agent and she said, no, you know, Chris Terrio doesn't ever want a publicist and has no desire to really do press and this. And I said, well, get me on the phone with him. So that started the conversation of me and then of working with him. And now I've worked with him since then, and that worked. And you know, he doesn't do a lot of press, but when he does, like we do like a couple bigger things just to kind of help tell his story. And then he goes back underground like the Unabomber. So I don't know, same thing. Like I watched King Richard. When I watched King Richard this year, I said, oh, I know what to do. And I need to represent the writer, and I also represent the director. So that campaign is well on its way. But I just have like, you just kind of get a gut feeling of, I just got to get a gut feeling for certain projects
that resonate with you.
Yeah, that resonate with me, that I'm like, oh, I know I can, this could get nominated. I said, I thought the same thing with like, you know, Imitation Game and back in the day, Lost in Translation, and which, you know, anyway.
Awesome. And so Annie, I'm going to pose the same question to you as well. What is your wild card story?
So a bit fun. Early in my PMK days, I was on the film team and going to Park City. And what I'd learned is that a lot of people didn't want to go to Park City, whether it was Sundance or not, and they certainly didn't want to take a slam dance film. I was raised in Upper Michigan in the snow, so I was perfectly happy to go. And I started taking slam dance films as well as Sundance in 2006. And when I walked out the door to start my own company at the end of 2012, they had been tracking me, the festival. And I ended up, one of the main clients I walked out the door with was the Slam Dance Film Festival, and I repped it for 4 years.
Wow. I've been to Slam Dance. It's a great festival. Wow. That's awesome. Awesome. Thank you for sharing, my dear. And Dustin, what's your wild card story?
Yeah, I think it's a little, for me, I think it's more about kind of just like leaning into your fears and fighting through like that adversity. Like I think that as kind of creative people, like we're constantly second guessing things. And you know, I moved across country without a job in LA, and Mark and his team hired me right up and got me a start in LA, which was fantastic. And then a couple of years ago, I was working at CBS and my contract came up for renewal and it wasn't renewed. And after a lovely summer of being retired, I decided to start Smith House. And 9 months later, I was at the base of the Eiffel Tower launching a brand new show for Amazon. And it's just, you have to believe in yourself more than anybody else. And you have to just say, fuck it. Like, you gotta fight for yourself, fight for the things you love, believe in yourself, and just keep moving. And I think that's really kind of on the PR side, a big takeaway for the writers here, any creatives. You know, you might not have your moment right now, but keep fighting, and it's going to happen.
Awesome. Now I'm going to go a little nuts and bolts here, because this question comes up a lot. Can you talk a little bit about budget? And this specifically is addressed to you, Dustin. What are typical questions that, first of all, that you want publicists to ask, that you should ask of the publicist? And also, can you talk a little bit about, again, what is the budget for, should one expect to pay?
Budget's a challenging question. Everybody has a different budget. And I don't think, like, what I would answer for Smith House would be right for anybody else here. But I think that going into talking to PR, you have to have a really honest assessment with yourself about what you can afford. That could be $1,000 a month. It could be $10,000 a month. You know, some clients are paying 20 plus. Like, it depends on what that value is. I think that as a writer, as an independent creative, the understanding for you and the agency or the publicist is good. They know you're not a corporate entity. So, you know, it's hard for me to quote what that exactly would be, but I think you have to have that honest conversation. And a lot of agencies or, you know, publicists will be able to scale and customize their services to meet what your financial needs are. But they should also be honest with you about whether or not they can even afford the resources on their end to be effective for you. I think from a questions perspective, you know, you really want to feel free to ask for referrals. Feel free to ask about what successful campaigns have looked like what has a relationship been between the publicist and the client for the resulting work to be successful, and where has there been failure. I think you can learn more about a publicist in a failed campaign, not for lack of trying on anybody or lack of merit or lack of quality of work, but there is a lot that comes into what stacks up against something succeeding. And I think that having an honest conversation so you can be prepared that might be your fate. You might not have a winning campaign the first time you hire a publicist, but they should have solutions or ways that they worked around a big fail or a big pass from, you know, you really wanted to be in Variety, they didn't want you in, so you were able to work an angle to get into another train. You know, there should be solutions as part of those challenges that they faced, and you should really connect with their thought process and their creativity.
Awesome. And before I ask the second part of that question, I forgot about Jane. So Jane, if you could quickly share with us your wild card story.
Okay, wild card story. Okay, I've lived in 5 countries, including this one. And one of those countries was Africa, in Namibia, and I was working on cheetah conservation. And I actually did a PR campaign for cheetahs. Big cats, and part of that was a social campaign, and one of the cats, we were doing the annual medical checks on them and found out that one of them needed a root canal. So I had to escort a cat to a dentist that does root canals on humans. And so we did that, and I took the photos, wrote up the story, and we used it as a social campaign to increase funding. It's part of the funding for a nonprofit.
That's pretty wild. Well, thank you.
Yeah, that was not
Literally.
No, that's wild. So there is many more questions that we could ask. We're almost coming to a close. So I'm just going to hit a couple of points, and please, anyone feel free to jump in. One of our viewers, Linda, had a question about a project, a podcast she's working on, and what the publicity campaign would be for that. Would that be, it's a smaller project, would that be something like social media? Like, how does she get publicity for her particular project?
I mean, you do need a publicist. Our agency has handled a couple of podcasts, and it's really pulling out the podcast media who cover podcasts specifically is a fairly niche group. So you just want to make sure that you're obviously targeting them. But they're hearing from the big players like iHeart and Odyssey and Apple, et cetera. I think a big part with podcasts is really finding, can you break out what your topic is and find writers who cover that topic? Don't be thinking about it just as a podcast. A lot of podcasts are built on experts. I don't know, I thought I saw this question pop up. I don't see it now. So how can you get those experts out there? But the number one way to get podcast listeners is try to get booked on other podcasts. If they listen to podcasts, they want to listen to more. So it's really being aggressive with discovering other podcasts in that same space who aren't maybe directly competitive, but share common interests, and try to book your hosts, talent, guests as a guest on that podcast to drive that connection.
Merci beaucoup. And another question I want to follow up with is, what's a creative pitch entail? Like, what does that look like when you guys are making pitches? What kind of questions how are you pitching the client or the event? Not all at once.
Well, from our particular point of view, we take a look at the show, and then we start breaking it down as to what kind of what we can pull out of the show. I mean, is it an LGBTQ? Is it diversity? What is it? What is it? What is it? Is it murder? Is it drama? Is it sci-fi? What are the key plot points? What are the talking points? And then we started pulling it out, and then we start talking to directors and producers. And usually, sometimes what happens with some of the networks is that we all get on a Zoom call with the creatives, and they start talking about the inspiration. And that helps us to pitch a story. It also helps us to put together all the story points. And sometimes it's like somebody said earlier, you can come up with a story idea that you think will work when you're pitching, and it doesn't land. And then you have to readjust it. But again, you have to know the press that you're pitching. You have to pitch to the right people.
Awesome.
If somebody's interested in diversity issues, you don't pitch it to somebody who covers another beat.
Awesome. So we are just about to wrap up. I had that final warning. If we could just go around, and if everyone could just give just a final word about the takeaway that you want people to take away from this, your particular segment, or what you want people to know. Your leave behind. And I will start with you. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say ask questions. Don't be afraid to learn more about the PR side. Hopefully this was informational for a bunch of people. But have this be the starting point. I think it's easy to kind of feel overwhelmed, or that's not my expertise, but the only way that we're all gonna, we all learn about each other's worlds, and that's gonna help you be better informed about the right time for you to maybe bring out a publicist or help have a role in the success of your project through media, and continue to network and learn more about what goes into the PR side, so we can help you out.
I'd say come in early, be part of the conversation.
Nice. Thank you.
I would just say be kind
Mm.
to your collaborators, and don't have the attitude of like, well, I wrote, no offense, but like, I wrote this, so I deserve. It's like, you're going to be shut out.
Right.
You want to be collaborative. You want to be able to, if it's a project that you've been working on for a very long time and there's a lot of deep research, talk about the fact that you can lend yourself as being the expert in this particular project, and how you can kind of help the PR team to be able to help sell it properly, potentially, or at least sell it from your eyes. So yeah, but kindness really works. Sorry.
2 things I like to say. when you get up in the morning, take a humor pill and a humble pill. And
Yeah.
the other one, which I will credit to Laura Kim because she did this, is drama belongs on the screen.
It's a good one.
That's such a good one. I would say just being mindful, like if you want to engage a publicist, no, we're going to ask you questions about the project, what your involvement, background information that we're going to need on you. So maybe start gathering those and think of kind of, it's always who, what, when, where, why. Those are all questions you're going to have to answer for us, and we'll have to answer for you for press.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I want to thank all of you.
Tony,
Thank you for-
Tony.
Oh, Tony. Oh my God.
You were
Tony.
so sweet. I was trying to get away, but I agree
No.
100% with what everyone said, and particularly Dustin, who said, you know, don't give up. Just keep going at it, and you know, you will make it. You will find your space. Definitely, that's my story.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank all of you again for participating. I also want to thank the audience. There were some really wonderful questions that we didn't get around to, but we will try to have them answered. I'm looking at you, Allison, wherever you are. I'll try to get that answer for you. And thank you all for participating. We hope to see you guys soon in some capacity. And again, thank you all for attending as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for
It was
coming.
awesome.